welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We got a good one for you as always. Thank you for joining us here on this Friday evening. We have a pretty crazy story coming out of meat packing factories all across the country. Members of Congress are pressing for changes to the law in the Biden administration's approach as federal and state enforcement agencies have begun a crackdown on companies that are employing underage migrants. So really just no sense of anything, really of anything substantive on this. Just kind of, I think it's being kind of talked about enough in the country at all. We just do not understand how this happened. We have not talked nearly enough about it, and it's absolutely stunning thing that I honestly sometimes feel like can be a little bit hard to kind of like even just wrap your brain around. Also, New York Times, we're going to do two stories today in Chicago. We're talking about J.B. Pritzker of Illinois. New York Times has him as the Democrats' SOS candidate. Also, we're talking about Brandon Johnson and the mayoral election. And one of my favorite international unions, the RMT of the UK, has a write-up in these times by the wonderful Maximilian Alvarez, who really just does a good job explaining their importance and relevance to this, push for actual kind of serious push for what feels like a general strike at the moment. So it is a pretty crazy situation. Thank you so much for joining us here, and welcome to Newsflash. All right, so we start today with this in the, all over the country. Minnesota is one instance where the New York Times found, but members of Congress now, they are pressing for stricter laws to prevent and penalize the use of child labor and tougher vetting by the Biden administration of adults who take custody of unaccompanied migrant children, as revelations about the exploitation of underage migrants by employers have prompted outrage among policy makers. Days after an investigation by the New York Times that revealed the explosive growth of migrant child labor in the United States, federal and state enforcement agencies have begun a crackdown on companies that employ children, and the Biden administration is under pressure to make broader changes in the way that it deals with minors who arrive in the country without parents. Because A, how are they ending up here, and what kind of type of coercion this involves, and B, really, I think it's another very important point, is how is this essentially just like slipping under the radar in a really incredible way. Like, it's just none of this should even be a possibility. None of this should even be a thought. In 21st century America, 2023, the fact that, we've heard about them, all sorts of stuff being done to migrant children. We've heard them being put in awful working conditions, not working conditions, but just detention conditions in these, in the Trump administration. How is this? The fact that, the fact that this is not like far and away, I'm hearing about this, Alex, the front page of the New York Times when I went to look for, what to talk about in today's show, just read the news and stuff like that, was this Alex Murdaugh situation. I have not read a single thing about it, but it's like, how are we talking about some guy who murdered his wife and kid or whatever, as opposed to it's a fundamental problem as opposed to people who have come here absolutely desperate and come here just refugees without their parents, separated somehow from their parents, either they along the way or they just left without the parents at all, and are being forced or in some way, and just ending up as these people who are just out of the freaking the progressive era Upton Sinclair type situation, working at these meat packing factories as kids and literally just slaves. You can only imagine how much they are being paid. It's just nothing. It's just absolutely horrific. Like, the fact that how is this not like the number one story of all time in anywhere, like just dominating every single news outlet right now. At least it does seem like something is being done. Top Senate Democrats have sent a letter Friday demanding answers from secretaries of the federal health and labor agencies by April 1st, saying they're deeply disturbed by the large numbers of unaccompanied non-citizen children that are being placed with exploitative sponsors and were working long hours in dangerous conditions. The letter, organized by Senator Richard Durbin, the number 2 of the Senate Democrats and chairman of the Judiciary Committee, raised concerns the agency in charge of those minors might be prioritizing placing children with sponsors over the children's safety and well-being. And yeah, so it's going to be to see how this is dealt with and kind of like what cultural capture. Is it going to be like one of those like school shooting type situations where we have, just it's kind of just culturally memory hold and we just forget about it because we can't process it and, we can't really like, on our own, just like do something about it. So we just kind of have to sweep it under our mental rugs and almost forget about it because like, or is there actually going to be some kind of substantive action, substantive change on this issue? Because it's really hard to think about because the fact that this is being allowed in the country should be an absolute outrage to every American. So the Health and Human Services Department, whose Office of Refugee Resettlement is in charge of housing migrant children, is supposed to ensure the sponsors protect migrants in their care from trafficking or exploitation. And the fact that if this is being, especially if this is connected back in a big way to kind of Biden policies or policies that in some way came from the top, in the way that the Trump, Jeff Sessions, whatever the name of that policy was that put the kids in the kids in the cages way back when, that is a huge indictment and something that it really is a big indictment on the Biden presidency, and I think something that it goes against my dark confession that I kind of teased on Twitter at SBOW272 earlier in the week. I think a few days back, but it really does show the fact that there is so little difference on this migration issue between Trump and Biden, especially if they can kind of connect this back to something that kind of came from the top. If this was if this was a kind of administrative mistake or just like some sort of result of some kind of unintentional result of some policy, and it just kind of was left uncovered, I think it's so important, at least that we investigate this. It's just at least to have some self-respect as a country that this is something that just happens kind of unchallenged or doesn't happen unchallenged in our society. And I think that fact is really going to be pretty crucial for just, this country. I feel like at least maintaining the limited amount of a kind of self-respect that it has is really just how is this situation dealt with. So something that we'll definitely kind of continue to try and follow in the future. All right, we will now move to our next story. This is a quick little profile in Chicago, where we're talking about J.B. Pritzker. This is by Jonathan Wiseman, who has had some kind of interesting articles in the past. So we'll see how he goes here. But he writes, Governor J.B. Pritzker sat comfortably in an office boardroom high above the Loop on Monday and half-heartedly batted away the notion he was preparing a run for the White House. The billionaire heir to the Hyatt Hotel's fortune may be seen by some Democrats as the in-case-of-emergency break-glass type of option here, but one of the prominent politicians who could stand up a White House run at a moment's notice. And I think that's going to be. I think it's a pretty fail-safe option. And I mean, I do think with Pritzker, like it is going to be probably a pretty, in case of emergency break glass option. Because honestly, probably Biden seems pretty set up to run. We hear literally conflicting stories every week in Politico or whatever kind of magazine that it's going to be, impossible for Joe Biden to make up his mind for anything like that to kind of happen, in any kind of near future, but. And here's the thing. This is my kind of troubling revelation. I didn't really build it into the show as much, but my dark confession that I kind of tweeted about earlier this week was essentially the fact that I have to admit I do not hate Joe Biden as a president. He is better than I thought he would be. In terms of a lot of issues. Like, it definitely could have gone worse on a lot of things. It could have gone way better on a lot of things. And definitely I think the progressive could have handled him way better on a lot of things. But as we get into, it's been a little over 2 years into the Biden presidency, I think I have to say, I think Biden has done a much better job, or not much, but a better job than I thought he would have done. Especially, he has been the most, left wing, quote unquote, he's ever been in his entire career. That is something I think you can really, truly, confidently say. And that's a pretty significant thing, and it's going to be a reason where unless it's like the age thing, I think is a really legitimate concern, and the fact that there are some people who I think legitimately we could definitely do a lot better than Joe Biden as a politician with his ideas, and especially the fact that he is going to be 86 if he finishes his second term. So that's why you got people like J.B. Pritzker. But I think, he's a billionaire heir to the Idaho Telus fortune, maybe seen by some Democrats as the in case of emergency break glass candidate. One of the few prominent politicians who can stand up a White House run at a moment's notice. I think that'd be a very interesting situation because, he's really one of the few people in the Democratic Party, of all political stripes, left, right, and center in the Democratic Party, or honestly really even the Republican Party, who is any kind of like smart political operator who has cares about politics, cares about getting things done, and has the will and ability and political organization to really do so. And that is really, really clear. So you can see that in his run and his reign in the great state of Illinois thus far. Although President Biden has said he intends to mount a campaign, that has not eased the Democrats' obvious worry. The famously dilatory Hamlet on the Potomac, I don't know what that's in reference to, might not decide to run for re-election at 81, and worry could turn to panic. But, well, Mr. Pritzker declined to provide a yay or nay on whether he would run. He added that a last-minute swap of an understudy for Biden was such an odd hypothetical, if you ask me. So that's something that apparently he only understands. I'm sure my dad would probably understand that, but I think it assumes a lot of things about someone who's 80s in this world today. Doesn't make any sense either. No kidding, 80 is a lot different today than it was in the 80s, he said in his signature aw shucks wave. And he's not a bad speaker either. He's someone who can, really fire up a crowd. I remember when he got reelected this past election cycle of 2022, he gave a pretty fiery speech. So politicians hate hypotheticals, or say they do to dodge questions. But if Biden cannot or will not run, the Democratic Party would have 3.6 billion reasons, according to Forbes' most recent estimate of Pritzker's net worth, to turn to him. And also, he's a lot of money, can fund anything that he wants to fund, and he's also a very effective political operator. He would run for two good reasons, says Ray LaHood, a former Republican congressman from Peoria who served as a transportation secretary in the Obama administration. He's a billionaire who's not afraid to spend his own money, and he's very progressive, which is where the Democratic Party is today, I wish. But indeed, Mr. Pritzker has turned center-left Illinois into an island of progressivism, much as Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who won re-election last year by 19 points, has enacted a blood-red Florida blueprint that he is now pitching to the wider nation ahead of an expected campaign. And while DeSantis has created a conservative bastion in Florida over the wishes of his diverse state, Mr. Pritzker's policies has wrinkled much of Illinois beyond Chicagoland. Again, he literally won, I think, by more this. Did he win by more this time, or less? I'm not sure. Let's just fact check that here on the fly. The 2022 Illinois gubernatorial election, J.B. Pritzker, Darren Bailey, 54.9 to 42.4. That is on a 59.6 turnout. 2018, he was on 54.5. So, marginally a little bit more votes there than he got in 2018. But yeah, nothing really too significant. But again, he's got popularity in that state, and he is definitely more popular than any other. For example, say more far right politician that recently suffered a bit of a problem that we'll talk about in a moment. So yeah, that's a kind of interesting framing you can already see there. It's rankling some people outside of Chicagoland. Under his leadership, the legislature has approved a $15 minimum wage, legalized recreational cannabis, and cash bail. Which, by the way, I remember seeing some crazy ads about, if you are a murderer, you'll be let out of jail right before the election from Republicans. And it did not matter. He just got more votes. So it just shows you that he's doing something right there. He's, again, as I said, effective political operator, something that the Democratic Party has absolutely none of in their ranks. Guaranteed access to abortions and gender-affirming care, and ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Last year, Mr. DeSantis used Florida tax dollars to ship migrants to Democratic cities like Chicago, and Pritzker expanded healthcare access to undocumented immigrants. On a recent morning, Sol Flores, his deputy governor, said she dragged him to a Chicago shelter at 7:15 a.m. so he could high-five migrant children as they headed off to school. Late last month, in the Lexington Elementary School gym in Maywood, a Chicago suburb, Pritzker unveiled his youth mental health initiative, then waited, sitting on a fold-out metal chair, as each health policy expert, school official, state rep, and state senator took their turn on the lectern. His security detail and a black SUV were ready behind the school, but he listened for over an hour with a wry smile on his face. Patience is a course of virtue in politics, but don't try and tell Pritzker there is a metaphor in his ability to wait out other Democrats. He has no interest in challenging Biden. Unity, he said, is the strongest weapon Democrats will have to thwart Donald J. Trump in a comeback. Possible Donald J. Trump comeback or a contest against DeSantis, the two presumed frontrunners for the GOP. But should a presidential race evolve, pitting Pritzker against Trump or DeSantis, it would be a clash of forceful avatars of modern conservatism and liberalism. In the rural reaches of downstate, Pritzker's shutdowns intended to slow the coronavirus pandemic has empowered the most ardent voices of the right, who point to crime and poverty in Chicago and the out-of-state relocations of Boeing, Caterpillar, and the hedge fund giant Citadel as his true legacy. Well, I mean, you can ask Ken Griffin, the head of Citadel, what he feels or how he feels about J.B. Pritzker, and I think we can probably end it on that note there. And the answer is not too good, not too good. Anyway, let's go now to our next story, and it is this. Brandon Johnson. Big news out of Chicago last night. On Tuesday night, the tectonic plates bracing Chicago politics tilted dramatically. Brandon Johnson, a former rank-and-file member of the staff and staff organizer for the Chicago Teachers Union, secured a spot in the race for mayor, the runoff, where he will face conservative privatizer Paul Vallis on April 4th, outperforming the both incumbent mayor Lori Lightfoot and Representative Jesus Troy Garcia. Johnson pulled off a pretty shocking upset. He ran an unapologetically left campaign, and really, originally it was Garcia who kind of had himself out there as the number one left-wing candidate, but just based off his record in Congress, and he was kind of the most well-known there as well, and that quickly started to crumble when it was put up kind of under a little bit of scrutiny. It was kind of put up under just a little bit of pressure, under a little bit of heat to it. It really kind of crumbled, and Brandon Johnson helps a lot by what, in my opinion, is the most effective local in America, CT Local 1. I don't know. I have not heard of another. But, yeah, they really did put their organizing muscle out behind Brandon Johnson all throughout some of the most kind of swing wards of the city. And last night he eked by, I believe, Lightfoot by about a point or so. Last night he announced the finances of the city belong to the people of the city, so we're going to invest in the people of the city. Johnson, who now serves as an elected member of the Cook County Board, started the race with little name recognition and faced 8 challengers. Just a month ago, Lightfoot scoffed at Johnson's candidacy, claiming that he's not going to make the runoff and not going to be the mayor of this city. Boy, oh boy. She is just on the outside looking in as an incumbent to being being in the runoff there. So more than a bit embarrassing, to say the least. This is the classic Dave Weigel quote. I guess it's not classic, but he had this on Twitter. They've endorsed Brandon Johnson, talking about the CTU. The Chicago Teachers Union. They've endorsed Brandon Johnson. God bless. Brandon Johnson isn't going to be the mayor of this city. Lightfoot is the first Chicago mayor in 40 years to be denied a second term. She's faced opposition from voters across the political spectrum, including many of those who supported her 4 years ago. After abandoning many of her progressive campaign promises from 2019 once in office, liberals grew critical of her administration, while more moderate conservative residents blamed her for an increase in crime and other problems afflicting the city. Garcia, meanwhile, did underperform after widely being expected to beat Johnson due to having forced previous mayor Rahm Emanuel into a runoff in 2015. Whether Garcia, who has governed as a progressive in Congress, now gets behind Johnson's mayoral bid, which is going to be a pretty big deal, and kind of shifting support, remains to be seen, and preventing another Rahm Emanuel, Lori Lightfoot, or possibly worse type situation, out-and-out police and ally and privatizer of public schools, Paul Vallis. Throughout his campaign, Johnson made fighting inequality across the city a central theme. He received major backing from the CTU and United Working Families, a coalition of left-wing organizations and unions that has become a highly influential player in city politics over the past decade. He's also received support from national groups like the Working Families Party. He's set up a pretty stark choice for Chicago voters who will decide in April whether to embrace a progressive approach to urban politics or to return to the neoliberal model that created many of the problems now plaguing the city. Crime, in particular, will be central to the campaign, making the runoff a test case of whether Johnson's anti-carceral, pro-social services approach can defeat a traditional law and order reactionary appeal by Vallis. So you got relatively progressive Karen Bass in L.A., you got Michelle Wu in Boston, you got Eric Adams in New York, a little side-eye there. And, of the major kind of big four cities in America, Chicago is going to be the next one who could really make a big turn to make it a solid 3-1 left-right majority there, which is going to be pretty cool if it is able to work. Anyway, Johnson, yeah. So Johnson really could be a pretty interesting movement mayor here. He got to start teaching in the Chicago public schools in 2007, first at Jenner Elementary School in the Cabrini Green neighborhood on the near north side, and later at Westinghouse College Prep on the west side. He then joined CTU staff alongside its long-term president, Karen Lewis, who helped reshape the union into a democratic and militant force that fought austerity, not only in public education, but in city politics generally. And when he was in that role, he helped coordinate the historic 2012 teacher strike, worked to block and shutter privatization schemes, and joined hunger strikes at the shuttered, poor, and working class diet high school, and successfully advocated for its reopening, fighting to win an elected school board rather than one handpicked by the mayor, which finally became law in 2021, which is a big deal. And that's why I said the CTU, they have been incredibly effective. He was a top organizer in that union, someone who it's really cool to see. I think this is when you talk about the left, there's a lot of talk about, the left is so demoralized, it's so down in the wake of the Bernie Sanders campaign, and there's nowhere to go. That is just so not true. If you look at the local level, if you look at, this strategy that we know works, it's worked time and time again, and, and also kind of really helped by the fact that our policies are popular, and, supported by a good chunk of the country. When we are able to effectively manage the interests of corporations, and, all the things that they have to throw at us, we can do a very impressive job all throughout the country and make, whether it is not, the fact that we have a CTU organizer and a good shot to be mayor is a really pretty incredible thing. That I really don't think would have happened in the near future. It would have been like some very much less left-wing option, and then a pretty much out-and-out Republican in the Democrats' name in running as a Democrat in Chicago for many years. Someone like one of the Dailies or something like that. Just neoliberal privatization. And of course, Paul Vallis is that, no doubt. He is that person through and through. But there is someone who offers a real alternative, which is a pretty incredible thing. His mayoral run, Johnson's stated priorities include increasing funding to neighborhood schools, year-round youth employment programs, reopening the city's public mental health clinics shuttered by former Mayor Rahm Emanuel, reducing fares on public transit, investing in affordable housing, and instituting a Chicago Green New Deal to boost environmental protections. And to pay for this luxury, Johnson proposed a real estate transfer tax on luxury home sales, a financial transaction tax, a head tax on large profitable companies that do business in the city, and new user fees for high-end commercial districts. According to Johnson, the ultra-rich and large corporations continue to benefit from the subjugation and the isolation of poverty, and my budget plan speaks to these critical investments. When it comes to public safety, which played the central role in the mayor's race, Johnson plans to pass the Treatment Not Trauma ordinance advanced by Socialist City Council member Rosanna Rodriguez, which would create a hotline to deal with crisis response, invest in violence prevention programs and no-knock warrants, and establish a dedicated office to deal with illegal guns and end the city's gang database, which opponents have claimed in a class action lawsuit is racially discriminatory. Taken together, Johnson's agenda represents a profound break from the corporate-friendly politics that have dominated Chicago in the neoliberal era. As leader of the third largest city in the country, Mayor Johnson could be positioned to usher in a new era of urban progressivism unseen in recent memory if he and forces supporting him can overcome the massive pushback that Capitol will mobilize against him. It's going to be interesting to see how bad it gets against Brandon Johnson in the next few weeks, and we will be following that campaign, to be sure, very closely.
My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWR and content better. And thank you so much for listening.
We have some interesting breaking news coming out from Amazon and AOC having a bit of a victory lap after this news coming out from Virginia. This is where they were going to do, if you remember a few years back, there was a big debate, where will Amazon have its HQ2? The amazing company was going to put its headquarters in make a second headquarters somewhere else in the country. One of them, I think, was going to be either Long Island City in Queens, or it was going to be somewhere in Virginia. They eventually chose the one in Virginia because, actually, I think they chose the one in New York. People, local elected politicians like AOC and others in the city council and stuff like that made a huge stink. And the Amazon was like, fine, we're taking our ball and going home, all that stuff. We don't want to have to deal with this. We're Amazon. But they are, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly where they are, but it's somewhere in Virginia, Arlington, Virginia. Yeah. So, but Jessica Corbett and Common Dreams writing this. After Amazon on Friday confirmed plans to pause construction on its second headquarters near Washington, D.C., Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez expressed vindication over her 2018 opposition to the tech giant's initial plan to build part of HQ2 in New York City. Following political leaders across the country engaging what critics called corporate bribery, offering Amazon tax breaks and other incentives to build in their communities, the company chose to split the project between Arlington, Virginia, and the Long Island City neighborhood of Queens. However, Amazon halted plans for the New York City campus in response to local backlash. So, yeah, this is what she says here. When I opposed this Amazon project coming to New York because it was a scam of public funds, the whole power of the establishment came after us. Billboards went up in the New York Times announcing me powerful calls, promised revenge. Op-eds and CEOs insulted my intelligence. In the end, we were right. I'll never get an apology from that time, but it was worth it. We protected New Yorkers from a scam deal to drain public dollars from schools and infrastructure in exchange for empty promises of Amazon jobs with zero guarantees or guardrails. Sadly, cities who took it are suffering. So, yeah. So, honestly, the point is, this is something that was really incredibly bold at the time. People in that area, Mike Genaris, and AOC, and bunch of others, kind of the OGs of the New York State Senate, very, very strong left-wing bloc that they have there. they really did a pretty incredible job. And because people from the left to the right to the center to the business press, they're all like, "What are you doing? You're going to ruin New York City. Amazon will make your city so much better. Like it's just this absolute hellhole right now. All that stuff that Queens and whatever. It's not a good place to live. It's a very poor community. All these jobs that Amazon really is under no obligation to provide in exchange for completely giving anything and everything to Amazon that they wanted to build this factory, and they've already halted construction on it because the economic winds are changing. We just dropped the deal, but you already gave us everything that we wanted, so it's already chill. And we'll just take our stuff and go home now because that's what we can do, and you gave us the power to do it. And Alex Salmon, a Slate politics writer, making a pretty good point here. This was not a safe position when they took it at all. And it was thankless, and it was a thankless one, as often is the case. The consequences for the Marx and corporate bootlickers who embrace former CEO Jeff Bezos and Amazon will be non-existent. But I want to end the show. Huge shout out now to AOC and the kind of People's Republic of Astoria for getting the Amazon situation dead on the nose. Newsflash, we'll be back on Monday with our first guest in a bit.